We go. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Jasmine Pope. This year, I am the vice chair of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Committee, and I'm joined by Magistrate Parvizian, who's the chair of our committee. And today we have, I'm really excited about this. We have an absolutely wonderful speaker in Gary Norman. Um, Mr. Norman has been blessed with a remarkable and multifaceted career while collaborating with incredible guide dog partners. He collaboratively engages with his clients, provides advice on aging and disabilities, and also provides coaching and integrative legal advice on issues, a variety of legal issues, such as board governance. He is a licensed consultant at the Standards for Excellence program operated by Maryland nonprofits. He's an adjunct law professor with a focus on public health law and policy, and he serves as the 2025-2026 chair for the Maryland State Bar Association's ADR section. He is a past fellow of the Maryland State Bar Association's Leadership Academy, and in addition to all of that, he serves as a trustee on the Board of Trustees for the Bar Foundation, for the Bar Association of Baltimore City, as well as a trustee at the Charitable Foundation of the Mount Moriah Masonic Lodge number 116. Um, and obviously, we're going to jump right into a couple of questions that we have for Gary, and kind of, you'll hear us mention a couple of things throughout this chat that we have with him. One of that being his partnership with Guide Dog. So, Gary, can you tell us a little bit more about that and your current Guide Dog name and what number you're on?
I am entirely excited always to talk about my dog partners and my human partners, which includes my wife. She's the boss here at this household, and I couldn't do anything but for a strong woman at my side. And in this case, I also now have a strong woman guide dog partner. Her name is Izzy. She's my fourth guide dog partner from guiding, fourth guide dog partner in general, and she's my second guide dog from Guiding Eyes for the Blind in New York, New York. And I still have in retirement my retired guide, Bowie, who I just walked during our daily or sometimes twice a day bro walks together. And they are not only a mobility aid in a certain sense as a service animal, but they have also been a huge part of my personal and professional life and identity. And I contribute so much of what I've done in my legal and policy careers based on this idea of the gift society has invested in me, trying to give back in turn through different things I've done from the animal law lobbying and section of the animal chair of the animal law section to nonpartisan journals I've run to being here today to talk about disability inclusion issues. Indeed, Izzy is on the floor right next to me right now, snoring, and Bo is downstairs on his orthopedic pillow.
Awesome. And as I touched on a little bit in your introduction, you are a professor and one that kind of has a policy mind focus. So can you tell us a little bit more about the types of courses that you teach, and maybe give us
Absolutely.
a little insight into your upcoming work?
So that's interesting. It's two levels for sure. Just very basically, I'm on adjunct faculty at Cleveland State University College of Law, which I still prefer to call my JD days when it was called this Cleveland Marshall College of Law, and certainly is apropos to our discussion of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, because it started off regionally as a law school dedicated to both night students, those coming from the steel mill to go to school at nighttime, actually, in downtown Cleveland. And it also started as one of the earliest law schools to admit women in the great state and native soil of Ohio. Specifically, I teach in our Center on Healthcare Law and Policy. I teach two courses on a rotating basis. One where I practice basically for about 25 years at HHS, healthcare law and finance, which is not my favorite of the two because it's very technical. It really requires much more direct lecturing. My favorite is public health law because it's very interdisciplinary minded. So I also teach public health law and policy. I just taught that last spring semester. And that really lends itself to a lot of my belief and philosophy of the law as service, which I really try to collaboratively discuss with my students. In both, we're really talking about healthcare, the healthcare system, what are its strengths and weaknesses in the United States, and also generally, how do we how do we structure it really soundly in a legal sense, in a way that really fortifies the social contract and makes Americans healthier.
Awesome. So October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And in 2021, the then Biden administration added A to what was then just the DEI acronym. And in recent times, we've seen some changes and even some attempts to kind of remove the A or even the DEI entirely. But talk to us a little bit more about what is the A in DEIA?
And indeed, I almost forgot to say this. Thanks so much to the Baltimore County Bar Association for hosting this important conversation. Of course, there are a lot of different observances or observance months. When I was chair of the State Civil Rights Commission, I really focused on trying to structure our board meetings as governor appointees around a significant observance month and its related policy issue. So for us, at least in this context, October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. It's a really great opportunity to spotlight both the progress we've made, but the progress that significantly lies ahead. The A is a piece of that conversation and that progress. And unfortunately, because of the Trump administration, it's also under some concern right now in terms of promoting the conversation about having fuller inclusion of law students with disabilities and lawyers with disabilities. The A represents or stands for or exemplifies the word accessibility slash usability. Um, Without the A, sometimes those who are committed to diversity work and well intended have overlooked disability as a dimension of disability as a dimension of diversity, in my humble view. As a past state civil rights commissioner, I had some tough conversations with our staff at the Civil Rights Commission about this, who didn't necessarily see it that way. And one thing that Biden did, I think, on so many levels in a positive sense, no administration is positive, but Biden was very positive when it came to affirmative law measures that included better the community, both on a social or a legal context, and also through this making them healthier and more productive citizens. His executive order from 2021 covered a number of groups within the federal government operationally, legally, and socially to say, we see you. We know we can do better in including you as leaders or managers in the public sector space. And these are the substantive affirmative policy measures we will take to achieve that. That includes everything from our friends in the LGBTQ community to racial minorities in our context today. What was, I think, groundbreaking in some ways and very necessary, even though other Democratic administrations have done a lot of work on disability inclusion, to continue to force the issue of better employment of lawyers with disabilities. The section in the executive order, which covers operations of federal agencies or departments, discuss really three big topic areas. Number one, it discussed the idea of a better, more holistic approach to reasonable accommodations in the workplace, really recommitting the government-wide to having the type of interactive conversation that it's said or alleged to be in the EEO process. If you look at GAO reports, some agencies or some departments didn't really necessarily truly sort of holistically approach accommodations. And that executive order really recommitted and reinforced that conversation. It discussed, and perhaps even somewhat shockingly, it discussed the idea that federal agencies and departments would be far more accessible in the physical sense, the physical space of federal buildings. Really trying to commit GSA to working on removing barriers affirmatively. And then it really also discussed the idea, as we know, the emergence of technologies and making sure that the technology space of the federal government is far more accessible. And because of that, I think because of that affirmatively hard law, soft law minded administration dedicated to diversity, I thought we saw a lot of progress in the public service space. I myself spoke as one of the panel speakers at the diversity conference OPM hosted. Unfortunately, we know that the Trump administration has removed all DEIA policies from the public space, and because the federal government will always be the convener, the big starter of public policy conversation, it's eroding diversity gains for lawyers with disabilities and law students with disabilities in a broad sense, I would argue. So we have seen some progress. The A helped achieve that progress, but now
Mhm.
I think we have serious backsliding. And as DEIA minded lawyers, we really must combat against that.
And so why is VA so important, right? For many years it was always just DEI. Why is it so important, this addition of the A and what that represents?
I think speaking for myself, it advances a conversation that lawyers with disabilities and law students with disabilities and public officials with disabilities who will generally be lawyers sometimes also matter in this conversation. This is an important basket of topics and people that we need to lift up and protect and support. But without the A, at least in my observation, sometimes disability is lost in the conversation. By having the extra letter, admittedly, there can be perhaps too many letters in the acronym. We're
Mhm.
really recognizing the 1 in 4 Americans who have an identified disability, and the many millions more of Americans who may have a disability but aren't identifying as disabled.
All right, so you keep talking about identifying as disabled and the importance of identity. And I think from my reading of that executive order that that was kind of one of the focuses was on the identity of disability. And so, can you talk to us a little bit more about your experience with your identity and disability and the way that which is that's translated to practice?
Sure. So I think about it in two ways. I've thought about this recently. Certainly, there is the medical piece of a disability. Almost all disabilities have some sort of perhaps chronic disease or a chronic medical issue. And then that may or may not trigger certain legal statutes, regulations, policies, and best practices. But then there's how the person, the individual, understands and interprets that that status, perhaps legally for sure, but also socially. For me, sort of the medical piece started when I was young, as a young kid in Northeast Ohio, roughly about 10 years old, when I was first diagnosed with my rare genetic disorder, but also as part of that, um, transitory long-term loss of vision. Um, and because I was diagnosed at that point at 10 years old, legally blind, that triggered certain social systems, certain policies. Not quite yet the ADA because that was not enacted yet when I was a little boy in Ohio.
Mhm.
But how I understood my life and status evolved during time, but particularly I think started when I was a teenager. I had what I would call usable, but significantly reduced vision by the time I was in 8th grade. I could still see large print, although I started losing that ability by 9th grade. I have always been very connected to animals and trees and somewhat able to hear them and feel them. I was very concerned about my small village that was once a huge farming community in Medina County, Ohio, and that basically a lot of farms were being gobbled up. I thought through unthoughtful development policies, generally in many cases to build sort of shopping centers or malls or new housing. And I hope to at least have some voice as a teenager that would affect. I sought admission to the Planning Commission in Brunswick, Ohio, and I don't know if the mayor told me this, our little small town mayor, or she told my dad at the time, who was very always involved in civics, even as vice president of the railroad at the steel mill. She basically said something like, "How could why would we have a teenager in the commission?" Which is bad enough, I think, from engaging youth in our policy, and then B, more significantly, why would a blind kid, like how could a blind kid be on this commission? And for me, sort of when I learned about it, I don't know if it was that year or later, that to me was a huge identifying experience. Like the world sees me as different than others. Um, and that can be positive, that can be negative, that can be an individual thing that we acquire and grapple with during a trajectory of time. It's also, as I've described here in the law review essay I did recently published, it's also a collective issue. Um, I think for too long in American history, we have identified different groups as less than or not part of the social contract. I would like to see identity as much more of a positive type issue where we individually and collectively see the value of others. Certainly, observances like this, I think, help that goal. For instance, in 2004, the first, quote, disability pride parade took place in Chicago, Illinois. And certainly during July every year, we also recognize disability inclusion on the day on which President Bush the first signed into law the ADA.
All right, so what does accessibility inclusion, what can that look like? And so talk to us a little bit more about your experiences, in navigating the legal profession, positive or negative, of what accessibility inclusion can look like.
So I will say a couple of things. One, I will define some of the terms, and then number two, I think I will applaud the people that have opened up doors for me, and then talk about what it looks like in terms of colleagues. So accessibility certainly looks in this day and age like a few things. One, it's the constant it's a constant issue or barrier that we grapple with as law students with disabilities and lawyers with disabilities, which is attitudinal, both attitude and then the removal of barriers about attitude. So, which is to say, bias or removing bias. So, on the positive, it looks like any lawyer with a disability or law student with a disability walks into law school, walks into practice. Um, they feel like they're part of the crowd, right? Like they feel like, while certainly they have to take the self initiative to seek accommodations, it's not going to be an unwelcoming process. They will feel seen, they will feel heard, they will feel like they can follow a process like any employer, any leader is going to follow a process. So removing the attitudinal presumptions that why is the law student or lawyer here and what can they actually provide? The significant next issue or term is the idea of programmatic accessibilities. This is more perhaps a bar association issue. So making sure that programs, products, activities are not only accessible, which is a first step, but usable in a variety of the means in which a different person with disability might need to access that as a legal professional. So a person in a wheelchair, assuming that's the only disability they have, may have physical programmatic access issues of getting into a usable space with their wheelchair. Um, Guy like myself with visual impairments will significantly need document or information access. So documents in accessible PDFs, Word formats, um, things that read to me in a certain way with what's called a screen reader. Somebody, of course, with other forms of disabilities that are invisible disabilities, like mental health disabilities, learning disabilities, may need other sort of programmatic adjustments like more breaks, um, different kinds of accommodations to meet their needs. So that's sort
Mhm.
of some of the terms and the concepts. And then in this day and age, for sure we can never hammer enough on the idea of making a 21st web and mobile digital space accessible and usable, that works with the various kind of visual impairments or other disabilities of people who need usable digital products. For me, I use a screen reader, so that means I can use Westlaw with a screen reader, but Westlaw has to be intentionally built in a way that it works with my program. Then I can't ever be on one of these calls without talking about the people who have opened up this opportunity for me. I am one of generations and generations of lawyers with disabilities who happen to be visually impaired or blind. Just like Gutenberg created the printing press, I don't think he could have fathomed the type of information access we have today as Americans or global citizens. I can't imagine what it would have been like to be a blind attorney in the 1950s when it was largely, as I've experienced in my own career, as kind of on the cusp of technology, sighted readers and braille, and if you had usable vision, perhaps large print. Um, Today, the level of technology is incredible, and I think just a bit of its own magic. Whether I have low vision and can see or read a lot, I can use a text enlarging program on my computer called Zoom Tech. With me, I use Job Access for Windows, which is a screen reading program. Um, I prefer Apple products. On my phone, I have what's called VoiceOver, which is also a version of screen reader. So people came before me had an even greater struggle. I have to thank them for they showed me what it's like to be a blind attorney. They showed me that this is an opportunity that coming from a first generation college family, I couldn't just even dreamed of being a public official in this context. So that really includes two pretty incredible gentleman. Unfortunately, we lost the one about, I think, a few years ago, Dr. Otis Stevens of the great state of Tennessee, who was a JD and political science professor. I remember when I was vice president of our Blindness Bar Association, and I think it was in Minnesota or Kentucky, he told me how much he thought about me and like what a bright future I had as a law student back then. And then my ongoing friend and mentor from Florida, Jim Kratz, who is one of the smarter, more eloquent speakers I've ever known. He did in his career county tax appellate work. And both those men opened up doors for me of how I think about myself and just the belief that I could do this job. And then what finally, um, I think we have a responsibility to prep the next generation, open doors for those men and women who have disabilities who come behind us.
You touched on this a little earlier, but the emergence of technology and the way that that has impacted accessibility and access to accommodations. Talk to us a little bit more about the types of emerging technologies that have really changed the landscape.
Even in my lifetime, when we talk about the most basic idea of law being a reading based profession, and indeed, I love books and libraries, I've seen this idea of the change of technology on a blindness level. So as I started to lose my vision, I started losing the ability to read what's called standard print in about the fourth or fifth grade. That was when I first got my large print books in school or grammar school. But those were incredibly taxing. Prior to when I was diagnosed, the last physical newspaper I remember reading was in maybe second grade. And then by the fourth grade, I couldn't see standard print. Newspaper print is 8 fonts. A large print is about 1820 fonts. And even with 1820 font, I started, even in the fifth grade, having a hard time reading. So I remember when I was a kid in fifth grade, the first book I got from what's called the National Library Service for the Physically Handicapped and Blind back then came in big green containers and they were cassettes, four-sided audio cassettes of books read through sort of a professionally set up process nationally and distributed through local libraries, usually one library per state also, although some states have more than one. Here in Maryland, we have the Library for Physical Disabilities and the Blind in Baltimore City that I'm a patron of. And largely today, we've gone from those cassettes and the difficulties of accessing cassettes in high school and college and law school to law school. By that point, I was using a screen reader and I started being able to negotiate contracts with publishers where I had to buy the book, but they would send me the text of the horn book on a CD-ROM in those days in 97 through 2000 to today where all reading for sighted people is so electronically minded and digitally produced that in the blindness community, one of our most common blindness reading apps is called Bard. through the National Library Service and the local libraries I talked about. Right now on my phone, a book in law school, say it's usually a hard book's about 2,000 pages. In the cassette days, that would have been a box of about, even four-sided cassettes, probably 30, 40 cassettes, and some probably used and not the best condition. Today on my phone, I have about 175 titles on my phone that are somewhere between law school reading, general reading, philosophical reading, religious reading. And that transition from the analog way to the digital way, even in my own lifetime, seems like what Mark Twain talks about. It's a form of magic that as a kid I couldn't even have really thought about. Um, so technology like that is opening up doors for many people with disabilities. Um, and because of that, I think there's a lot of optimism about what the future can hold. However, if we don't continue the goal and the positive law requirements to make sure it's accessible, we will backslide as we're seeing in this administration. Um, there are only other forms of emerging technology that will continue to improve the the life and professional experience of those with disabilities, visible or invisible. Artificial intelligence is certainly part of that. So we see this, say, in the context of the home, where as a woman lawyer with a disability or a lawyer with a disability in my house, I can work with basically very AI rich now Alexa. I can have it turn on the lights for me. I can have it read books through Audible for me. I can have different things done in a far more accessible way than we could have in the past. So I think that is a significant also leap forward in potential progress. As with all things, all technologies, even ancient forms of technologies, we need to have the right policy guardrails in place to make sure that they best serve us as humans. Um, they make our lives better, more free, and more opportunistic so we can help others. If they get in the way of promoting liberty and personal individuality, then of course um, those are net detriments. But I am somewhat of a tech optimist, so I think our advances in technology have been largely very good for most lawyers with disabilities.
Okay, good. Now you, as well as other people within the profession, have really focused a bulk of your career on advocating for the inclusion in legal and public policy realms of those with disabilities. Um, so, talk to me a little bit about the barriers to accessibility that exist presently and ways in which we can try to work towards addressing them.
Sure. So some of that, as I said, is the attitudinal barriers, the programmatic barriers, and then of course the most significant one is to think about is how do we make technology or emerging technology accessible but usable. That was actually a concept I learned from my dear colleague Carrie Thompson through the German Marshall Fund in the United States. We were both fellows of that internationally, and then post our time in Europe through that, we ended up meeting each other because she's significantly younger than I am. Incredible public policy disability inclusion person internationally. We ended up getting an alumni grant through GMF to do disability dialogue work together. And she taught me the idea like, yes, you could have the legal requirements of accessibility, but still not have it necessarily be user friendly or usable. So that is a big concept I always think about in terms of also making sure we remove barriers to technology. Um, there are sort of two levels on what we can do as professionals. There's the individual level, there's the bar association level. On the individual level, I thought I would be positive and talk about what that can look like in part. So one is for our colleagues who may have medical conditions, but not necessarily disabilities, but are disability allies, or they have no disabilities at all, and they truly care about their workmates and law partners. They can find a way of having bilateral communication with their colleague with a disability, talk about what is helpful, what is not helpful. It's certainly a two-way street. So finding the sweet spot, as a word, between uh, knowing maybe when their colleague is struggling, but also knowing when their colleague has to figure out a problem or work a problem in the built environment. The built
Mhm.
environment includes our physical space, like an office building. It also includes our natural space or the outdoors. And then I would also, of course, add that in this day and age, the built environment is indeed the digital space. I have a couple examples of that. It also looks like colleagues getting to know each other and appreciating each other's needs and wants. Um, there's an example of that too, especially in the guide dog context about service animal accommodations. So, in terms of finding the sweet spot of help versus removing independence, I think about at least one of my Mason brothers this past year as a sort of a non-legal example. We traveled throughout the state together, and he learned of like when I should follow him with Izzy. He also learned when maybe a new building would be too uncommodious or tight, and maybe grabbing his arm in what's called sighted guide would be better. Um, Also applies in the legal context. I can remember my former quasi law partner at the office, boutique law practice with HHS, when we attended the decision for the Affordable Care Act in DC. Um, we had planned to meet each other separately and to go out to lunch afterwards. And what she did, I never really knew until I got there, is that she had called ahead to the marshal's office for the lawyer's door and made sure, knowing the level of protest that would be involved, that once I got pretty close to where they could see me in the side of the Supreme Court building, that the marshals came out and escorted, I think it was my second guide dog and me, into kind of like where you go in as an attorney to get registered, and you have to like put your phone in a locker and so forth. And then she had also talked to the chief of staff of the court, and they had like my own space set out for me during the court decision that day. And then they kind of actually had to set up with the marshals to get me out earlier so I wouldn't have to deal with the crowds. So like that one-on-one partnership. Um, on the other hand, it requires some bilateral commitment by the lawyer with a disability as well to both know and manage their dog, in my case, in a legally or socially sound way that certainly protects our rights, but also appreciates that sometimes even the most supportive people have their own issues. Same colleague fought for me, made sure I had a good experience in DC. She has legitimate severe medical issues. So I learned the days in which, as a very dog friendly person, actually, she wanted to, like, unfortunately, sometimes feed my dogs in the office across four dogs now. But I also learned days where she was just, some days seemed to be better than others in terms of her allergies, like medically severe allergies with dogs, where she actually just sort of got a little bit like um, breathing difficulty by being around the dogs. And I knew those days that like if we needed to meet, I needed to call her, or I needed to kind of like hurry past her office to appreciate the issues that she had. Um,
Yeah.
and so that's individual level. And then on bar association level, um, we can't emphasize enough that bar associations need to fundamentally internalize disability inclusion as a value. I believe that the MSBA has made significant progress, but it has still much more progress to make. As part of that, we need to make sure that all bar associations' web and mobile products are accessible and usable.
Hmm. All right. So, and kind of segueing from that, let's talk about the other key A word, which is allyship. What can we as fellow attorneys do to help those with disabilities within the legal profession?
I think foremost is to build relationship and have communication with one's colleagues, if presuming that you don't have a disability. And understand how you can ally them or partner with them and authentically appreciate their identity, appreciate them as competent professionals, but also understand that with disabilities come not only benefits, but challenges, sometimes challenges in terms of transportation. And with me dealing with Lyft drivers as a service animal handler, complications in terms of getting documents still, even in this day and age, sometimes to read the right way. Understanding that almost all disabilities, I can say as a blind guy, have other invisible, sometimes disabilities like fatigue, stress, anxiety, depression. Understanding that disabilities fluctuate and are not simple creatures to wrangle. I think there's so much I've gotten from my disability, but it comes with its challenges and barriers as well. And having the honest conversation with one's colleagues about what the disability experience is like. Um, it's a great adventurous life, but it's not for the faint of heart, I would say, in my humble opinion. So it's communication, it's understanding, it's all of us being supportive of each other in this sort of DEIA context.
Now, I understand that you are working on, or you started working on a book. Is that right?
That's the long-term goal. I've started having some conversations with the MSBA. They want to diversify authors. So it's in
Talk to us a
a
little bit more about that
yeah,
project.
it's kind of outlining sort of space right now. I wanted to get out my next essay at the Journal of Law and Health, which they're editing right now in Cleveland State. I'm really excited about that because um, I practiced much more technical finance law at HHS, although I served as a year as a public policy advisor for health equity. And I've really grown in through some side national clients, public health policy that I really love within healthcare law and policy. And so my next essay is really exploring this idea of the impact of animals on our public health as individuals or collectively. I'm very, very excited about that. I talk about all my guide dogs, how they've improved my physical, emotional, and spiritual health as part of the wellness wheel. And then I propose two types of studies. One is epidemiology. So that's sort of the study of long-term health in a population, much more medically research oriented. I propose a blood pressure study of guide dog handlers. And then what's really cool that I learned last semester in teaching public health law is this idea of taking an evidence-based approach to studying the impact of law and its effectiveness called legal epidemiology, in which I propose a study about service animals in that regard as well. And now I want to turn to my book projects in the future. Um, I think I have three in mind, and actually all three touch on DIA. One, as a lifelong lover of the past and folklore and history, I've been thinking about writing a book I will call Requiem to Restored Citizenship. It will be exploring the public policy choice to restore the citizenship of Robert E. Lee in the early 1970s. After the Civil War, he was never allowed to resume citizenship when Virginia reintegrated into the Union. My other book project I've been thinking about is just talking about my animals through their voice, which is very non-public policy oriented. And then the one that I've been thinking about is incorporates a little bit of both. So it's a little bit of public policy, but also I've been also thinking about the idea of health and the trauma that comes from negotiating a career as a lawyer with a disability. So I want to talk about past or present lawyers or legal officials or public officials with disabilities and how the disability influenced their epic and history more holistically than just this is a blind guy in my case and he's proud. I want to talk about what is the law they shaped, what is the big court decision that they loved issuing, say in the case of Judge Tattle from the DC Federal Court of Appeals, or in the past, answering the question for someone like Martin Luther in the state of Maryland. He was the lawyer of his age in the Mid-Atlantic. He was also a raving alcoholic and racist. Like, how did he practice such good law in representing someone like Vice President Aaron Van Burr during the trial that was presided by Chief Justice Marshall, and yet have just such social issues? And then I think, and I don't know how to incorporate it, I think I want to talk about, in say Martin Luther's case, did he maybe have bipolarism, we would call now? Like, did he drink because he didn't handle his health well? Someone, people that I look up to, like Thurgood Marshall, who sort of started the conversation of integrating different types of diverse people. How did he manage his health? How was he such an incredible jurist for so long? I got to think it's because he had a balanced life. And I think that's really critical for us as lawyers with disabilities to be as healthy as well as we can, understanding that disability has disease associated with it. Too many presumptions say that just because you're disabled, you're sick. And that's a significant public health paradigm we need to change in the United States.
Thank you. So we do have just a little bit of time left, and I want to give some of the people on our call the opportunity to ask questions if they have any questions. But first, I cannot stress enough how appreciative we are of you, Gary, and your time, for always willing to be able to lend yourself to conversation, to sharing with us your knowledge, your lived experiences, and always parting wisdom on us about ways in which we as allies hopefully can do better in supporting our fellow colleagues and peers throughout this legal profession. So thank you so much for your time. But if anyone has any questions, we do have a little bit of time left. So I'll open it up to any of the participants.
Gary, this is Haas Parvizian again. You mentioned as that there needs to be better communication and more camaraderie amongst legal professionals. Specifically, though, in a courtroom setting, what can judges, magistrates, and fellow lawyers do to help the process along for people with the accessibility issues that you have mentioned?
Well, first, as I understand, practicing more federal law in a very specific kind of like counselor role instead of courtroom law. A lot of accommodations sometimes come through orders of judges. We've been advocating through the DEIA committee at the state bar the idea of trying to do a better job of housing that in one more clear spot within the administrative office of the courts. So that is a significant policy issue that I advocate for. Is basically sort of having a statewide court official that is the ADA accommodations official, and that is her or his sole position. Certainly, we can start, once that's in place, we can start facilitating that on a more local level. There's also an issue of physical space as well as digital space. Many of our courthouses are older in nature, so we need to understand that a courthouse or our court system is one of our major social institutions in the United States and needs to be properly funded in terms of infrastructure and providing our judges and our public officials with the resources they need to promote the public good. If we actually thought about that in a holistic way and made sure that they are far more accommodating and comfortable to older adults and people with disabilities, that is a significant next step for the policy conversation. And then number three is those who don't have disabilities or have some connection with disabilities to understand how, at least in my context, a blind lawyer accesses information. It shouldn't be shocked if I ask opposing counsel, I need an accessible PDF. Like, our profession should know what is an accessible PDF. Law school should know what is an accessible PDF in the 21st century. And unfortunately, some institutions and some colleagues still don't know what accessibility means in that context.
Thank you. Any other questions before we conclude? All right. I that's it. That's all we have for you guys today. Again, Gary, thank you so much. We are
Oh,
all.
thank you. I'm very flattered to have been asked.
Oh wait, I think Lisa Settles has a comment or a question.
I actually just put a comment in the chat thanking Gary for his work. So if you want to read it so that everyone has the benefit of seeing it,
Yes.
I'd appreciate it.
Sorry, I did not realize. Okay, just so you know, Gary, Lisa's comment was thank you for sharing your experiences with us today. Hearing your perspective is particularly interesting and helpful to her, and that she represents employers in employment law matters, including issues around accessibility. So thank you.
Very nice. I'm always happy to chat to you offline, Lisa.
Sounds good.
And
Have a great day,
Gary,
everyone.
You too.
if you don't mind, Gary provided me with a couple of really great resources. I can drop those in the chat for people that are interested. I found those to be particularly helpful and informative, so I'm just going to drop those in the chat if that's okay with you, Gary. I just want to
Yes,
double check.
absolutely.
Okay. So just give me a second to find one. Okay. Oops.
While Jasmine is doing that, I do want to echo Jasmine's thanks on behalf of the Baltimore County Bar Association and especially the DEIA committee. You said you're flattered. We are flattered that we had your expertise and someone of your caliber speaking to us and educating our bar association. And your voice is heard. So we do appreciate you
Thank you. I
greatly.
appreciate that.
All right. Rachel, it's not letting me add a document from my computer. Can I send it to you and can you share it with those who were on the call today so that they have access to that?
Yeah, absolutely. No problem.
Okay,
Thank
I
you.
will email that to you. And so you guys can just look for an email from Rachel and it'll include a link of resources that Gary provided me, which were, again, super helpful and informative. Okay, but thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your week. And hopefully we'll see you at some of our upcoming events.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you, everyone.
everybody.